The first anchor fell while 3 mountain villages were still tying children to their roofs. Sybil March stood on the eastern crown of Stormnet Tower 7 with one hand wrapped around a tension line and the other raised toward the royal cutters below. "Stop." The word vanished into the wind. Ash rolled through the ravines. The cyclone had not reached full force, but the nets were already singing the strained note that told an experienced crew which anchors carried too much weight and which might survive until dawn. A royal dragon landed hard enough to shake frost from the beams. Dragon King Everard Lorne dismounted in black scale armor, dark hair whipped back by the storm. Behind him came Sky Minister Coralie Sedge in a silver flight mantle. "The eastern nets obstruct the new royal lanes," she said. "Cutting begins now." Sybil descended the rigging. "Those lines do not obstruct flight. They divert crosswinds above the housing shelves." Coralie looked toward the villages clinging to the mountain face. The communal system was built before high-altitude dragon routes. It has become inefficient. Wind does not care what century a rope was braided in. The tower workers lowered their eyes. They had served beside Sybil's husband. They remembered how the court described his death. An unavoidable loss caused by outdated construction. Not a man who had spent his final breath keeping an occupied tower upright. Everard studied the nets between the spires. "My riders lost 2 supply dragons last month. They struck an ash shear above the private corridor," Sybil said. "Not my nets." Coralie offered him a sealed report. "The widow has disputed every royal finding since her husband fell. My husband fell because someone weakened the lower anchor before the storm. That allegation was investigated. It was filed. And found unsupported," Coralie said. "You were ordered to lower the eastern span." "I refused." "Why?" "Because the cyclone is turning north. Remove this span, and March Hollow and the Slate villages take the full pressure. The Royal District has reinforced walls. The Royal District also has private shelter tunnels," Coralie said. "The palace shelters cannot hold every unregistered family. Then the nets must." A gust slammed into the tower. The ropes bowed toward the ravine, then recovered. Sybil felt the answer through her palm. Balanced. For now. Everard stepped onto the outer grating. For a moment, he followed the net lines not as a ruler reading an obstacle, but as a flyer remembering one. Years ago, after the Glass Ridge fall, Sybil had tied his shaking hand to a guide rope and taught him to cross by listening to tension instead of looking down. He had never thanked her before witnesses. He had simply returned every storm season and stood where the rope sang lowest. His left hand closed around his cloak, the old reflex of an injured flyer facing a height he no longer trusted. Coralie said, "Every hour of delay closes another protected lane." Everard's face hardened. "Cut the eastern anchors." His order did not break the storm. It only removed what had been holding it back from the villages. No one moved. "That is an order." The first axe struck iron cable. Sybil did not plead. She dropped to the anchor housing, shoved one cutter aside, and drove a locking pin through the secondary wheel. "If you cut the main line without bleeding pressure, the western tower will take the recoil." She looked at Everard. "You may destroy the net. You will not make my crew die badly while doing it." Everard gave a short nod. "Follow her sequence." It was not mercy. It was permission to dismantle her life correctly. The cutters worked under Sybil's commands. Release the upper braid. Brace the western wheel. Clear the lower platform. Count 6 breaths before the final cut. Each order preserved someone while each stroke erased the protection her husband had died maintaining. When the main cable parted, the eastern span collapsed across the sky. Wind rushed into the gap. Far below, roofs groaned. Coralie opened the private lane contracts. Sheltered passage will remain available to registered riders and licensed cargo houses. You cut public shelter and sold the calm air behind it. The Crown is standardizing survival. Survival that begins with payment is not protection. Everard heard her. He did not answer. Another anchor fell. Something pale moved beneath the tower eaves. Dozens of silver bodies emerged from the iron ribs. Spiders as large as her hand. Legs thin as needles. Abdomens bright with cold moon metal. One lowered itself onto the severed line. It touched the cut, then withdrew. "They avoid weak anchors," a worker whispered. "No," Sybil said. "They avoid false tension." A weak anchor sags. A false one pulls as though someone taught the load to lie. More spiders descended. They crossed old rope, cracked stone, and storm-bent iron without hesitation. At every anchor severed by the royal cutters, they stopped. One by one, they turned toward the palace. Silver thread streamed behind them. Coralie said, "Remove them." No guard volunteered. The spiders climbed into the cyclone and began weaving across open air. Their web did not rebuild the village span. It rose toward the private royal corridors, the ministerial flight platform, and the palace itself. Silver lines struck the palace spires until the royal towers were wrapped in a geometry no Stormnet crew had designed. The spiders were not accusing anyone. They were seeking balanced tension. They did not know rank, contracts, or guilt. Their moon metal legs followed stress, false load, and hidden cuts the way water followed cracks in stone. Every shining line avoided the anchors the ministry had marked as naturally failed. Instead, the web pulled toward a row of hidden cuts beneath the platform marked for private lane authority. Everard looked from the silver pattern to Sybil. What do they know? She met his gaze across the severed net. Only where the weight has been made to lie. The spiders had not cleared Sybil. They had only redrawn where the mountain had been taught to carry weight. Coralie Sedge stood beneath the first silver span wrapping the palace and watched it tighten around the ministerial platform. "Invasive sky fauna are not engineering witnesses," she said. "Their nesting pattern has no standing under royal infrastructure law." Sybil kept one hand on the cut eastern line. "No. But tension does." Another gust struck the towers. The silver web flexed, then drew taut across the royal spires while the exposed village span shuddered below. Everard looked toward the guards reaching for hooked poles. "Do not cut it." Coralie turned. "Your Majesty, the web is obstructing 3 protected lanes. So were the nets, according to your report. The spiders may damage palace stone. Then preserve every line before anyone touches them." He had preserved the web only after ordering the net cut. The difference mattered to evidence. It did not yet matter to the villages below. It was not an apology. The eastern anchors still lay severed beneath his boots. Everard had ordered them cut. Now the storm was using the gap exactly as Sybil said it would. He summoned the royal surveyors, but Sybil refused to let them begin from the palace. "You read a net from the load outward," she said. "Start where the burden was taken." She led them to the broken village span. Silver strands crossed the sky in unequal triangles. The spiders paused wherever force shifted from one anchor to another. "They do not know who owns a platform," Sybil said. "They follow stress." A surveyor lifted a brass angle frame. "Your frame measures where the line is now," Sybil said. "Mark where it was meant to pull." She pointed toward the eastern tower. Then the palace ridge. The communal span had once distributed the cyclone across 6 village anchors and 2 mountain braces. After the cuts, the load had been redirected into the royal corridor supports. The web had followed that transferred weight. Coralie said, "Private lanes were reinforced to absorb storm pressure. After the public nets were weakened." "That is an allegation." "It is an angle." Sybil stretched a guide cord between the exposed village anchor and the ministerial platform. The cord aligned with 3 silver strands. Below them, the first village roofline bent under the exposed wind. Mothers dragged rope over chimney stones while children lay flat against the tiles. The palace had inherited the village's burden because someone had changed where the mountain carried it. A protected lane was not protection if it began after payment. They crossed to the platform marked for private lane authority. The spiders had refused 4 lower anchors, bending their silver lines around them toward older stone. Coralie said, "Those anchors were damaged during last winter's ash storm." Sybil knelt beside the first one. Storm scoring left rough crescent bites where stone, grit, and ice struck metal. These cuts were smooth, paired, and nearly equal in depth. "A storm cut leaves ragged bite marks," she said. "These were made by tools." A surveyor touched the groove. "Could maintenance crews have trimmed corrosion?" "Not across the load face." "You never cut the part that holds tension." Coralie folded her gloved hands. "Approved contractors reinforce this platform. Their methods may differ from village practice. Steel does not obey contracts." Sybil moved to the second anchor. Ash paste disguised the fresh metal beneath. She scraped it away with her buckle, revealing 2 narrow saw lines. The spacing matched a double-toothed blade used by licensed high-lane crews. Coralie said, "That tool is common across the kingdom. So is intent difficult to prove." "I am showing method." Everard looked at the scoring. "Who signed the platform reinforcement?" "The Ministry Contracts Office," Coralie said. "After structural review." "Bring the review." A clerk brought 3 sealed packets. The first contained the private lane contract. The second declared the lower communal anchors naturally unstable. The contract had been approved 11 days before the failure report. "You sold sheltered passage before the public anchors were officially declared unsafe," Sybil said. "Advance contracting is normal when risk is anticipated." "On what inspection?" Coralie gestured toward the third packet. The maintenance ledger was missing. Only its cover receipt remained. "Where is the ledger?" Everard asked. "Transferred to storm loss review after the tower death," the clerk said. Sybil went still. "My husband's tower?" "Yes." The ledger arrived near dusk in a warped leather case. Her husband's handwriting appeared 3 weeks before his fall. Lower eastern anchor pulling against false load. Paired scoring beneath ministry brace. Request full suspension of private lane construction until communal tension is restored. No suspension followed. Another hand had added, "No structural defect confirmed." "Continue approved works." Sybil traced the pressure of her husband's pen. He had written hard enough to cut the paper. Everard stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of the dragon beneath his skin. "He reported this before he died." "Yes," Coralie replied. "He reported suspected weakening. The ministry found no proof." "Then why was the ledger removed from tower custody?" "For central review." "Before or after his fall?" Sybil asked. No one answered. The final page classified the accident as natural failure caused by obsolete communal construction. Beneath it sat the Sky Ministry stamp. Sybil checked the recovery time. Her husband's body had been lifted from the ravine at the 9th evening bell. The natural failure ruling had been stamped at the 7th. Coralie's fast did not change. 2 hours before anyone recovered him. Coralie did not deny the time. She only said, "Preliminary classifications are opened before recovery in every major storm loss." The web had measured the lie. It had not yet repaired what the lie exposed. Coralie Sedge closed the maintenance ledger. "Preliminary classifications are opened before recovery in every major storm loss." The stamp marks the beginning of review, not its conclusion. Sybil looked toward the villages. Preliminary was a clean word for judgment made before a body cooled. It allowed emergency works to continue. It allowed private lanes to continue. A roof tore loose below them, struck a chimney, and vanished into the ravine. Families scattered across neighboring tiles, while tower bells sounded the exposed span warning. The storm had strengthened. Silver threads around the palace tightened, but the spiders did not descend to repair the communal net. They only traced the loads already present. They measured. People still had to act. Sybil seized the eastern guide rope. "Clear Tower 6. Bring every reserve braid and the long storm hooks." Coralie blocked the stair. "The public span has been decommissioned. The mountain did not sign your order. You cannot reconnect it without destabilizing the protected corridors. I am building a temporary retention line." "Using what supports?" Sybil pointed toward the palace ridge. "The private corridor braces. Those braces carry royal riders, medical flights, and supply dragons. They are also carrying pressure stolen from the villages. Redirecting them will close every sheltered lane above the eastern range. For one night. One night during cyclone season can halt the kingdom's trade. One night without the line may remove 3 villages from the mountain." Everard stood between them while the wind hammered his cloak. Sybil handed him the angle cord. "Choose where the burden goes," Coralie said. "Private lane priority is protected under emergency flight law." Emergency law was written to keep people alive, not contracts moving. Another village bell joined the first. Cargo dragons circled above the royal corridor. Below, children remained tied to chimney stones. Everard looked at both. "Close the private lanes. You will strand royal flights in open ash," Coralie said. "Ground them at the western roost. The ministry cannot guarantee their cargo." "I am not asking the cargo to survive before the villages." Red flags rose over the palace ridge. Dragons turned away while royal guards unlocked the corridor braces. Everard had made the choice Sybil demanded. It did not return the anchors he had ordered cut. Sybil climbed first. The temporary line had to cross the gap between Tower 7 and the palace support ring. Only 2 guide ropes remained over the ravine. Everard stepped onto one behind her. A crewman offered to fasten his safety line to Sybil's harness. "No. The crosswind is rising," Everard said. Then listened to the tension. Years ago, she had tied his shaking hand to a guide rope and taught him not to look down. Now she clipped his line to the palace brace instead of her own. "If I fall, you do not follow me. That is not how a king protects his people. No, it is how a storm worker keeps one body from taking 2. She crossed. Everard followed with one hand locked around the rope, his left shoulder stiff whenever the ravine opened beneath him. At the palace brace, Sybil drove in the first storm hook. "Feed the reserve braid." The line snapped across open air and pulled hard enough to bend the iron frame. Below, another roof began to lift. More tension. Coralie stood on the ministerial platform. The private supports were not rated for communal load. They were rated to carry what the communal anchors used to carry. It became the same thing when someone cut the lower anchors. Sybil inspected the paired blade marks. Their spacing matched licensed high-lane crews, though the depth varied enough to suggest several workers. "Bring the contractor blade register." "Not during an active rescue," Coralie said. "Especially during one." Everard ordered it opened. 6 crews had worked on the ministerial platform. Only High Ridge Arrow Works used double-toothed blades matching the marks. Their order authorized removal of unsafe communal metal and preparation of private lane supports. No StormNet engineer had signed it. Sybil tightened the temporary braid while the clerk read. "Payment account?" Everard asked. "Ministry Infrastructure Reserve," Coralie said. The page showed otherwise. The first payment came from a fund titled Eastern Village Relocation. "Relocation?" Sybil asked. "A contingency fund for families displaced by structural failure. The failure had not happened. The ministry prepares for foreseeable risk. The private lane contract predates the natural failure report. Now the relocation fund predates storm season. Planning is not sabotage. No. But it tells us what outcome your office expected." The temporary line caught the village span. For one terrible moment, every support screamed. Then the palace braces took the weight. The roofline settled. The braid held. But Sybil could hear the palace brace learning a weight it had never been meant to confess. The web had wrapped the palace because the palace had inherited the village's burden. Now the palace was finally carrying it openly. The villages had settled under palace weight, not royal mercy. The clerk turned the contractor page. High Ridge Arrow Works had received its first relocation payment 6 weeks before the earliest recorded anchor failure. The authorization did not name Coralie. It bore a ministry sub-office seal. Beneath the payment line stood a destination note. "Clear eastern housing shelf before private corridor expansion." Coralie did not flinch. Clearance can mean evacuation before structural failure. Do not turn contingency language into murder. The relocation note did not prove sabotage. It proved the ministry had named the villages removable before the storm did. "Clearance means evacuation," Coralie said. "The eastern shelf was already considered unstable. A responsible ministry prepares routes before families are trapped." Sybil kept both hands on the temporary tension wheel. "Then show me the evacuation maps." The sub-office held them. "Show me one family who was warned." Contingency planning often begins before public notice. The palace brace answered with a deep metallic groan. The temporary braid had pulled the outer support ring 3 fingers toward the ravine. Silver webbing tightened above it, marking the new load without correcting it. The spiders measured. The iron continued to bend. Sybil pressed her ear to the guideline. "Tower 6 is taking recoil." "How long will the braid hold?" Everard asked. "Until dawn if the storm turns east. Less than an hour if it turns north again." A gust tore 2 roof tiles from March Hollow. The temporary line caught the pressure, but the palace brace bent farther. "We need a permanent re-anchor," Sybil said. "Not another borrowed support." Coralie looked toward the villages. The communal foundations were condemned. By the same office that funded their clearance. By structural review. Then open the contractor records. Everard gave the order. High Ridge Aero Works had worked on every support between the ministerial platform and the eastern housing shelf. Their records arrived while Sybil's crew added a second braid to the failing palace ring. The contract named one foreman responsible for anchor preparation. His final work entry appeared 3 days after Sybil's husband died. Transferred to Western Corridor Development. No receiving office had signed for him. Where is he now? Everard asked. Contract labor is not tracked as royal personnel, Coralie said. He supervised ministry work. Through a licensed company. Paid by a village relocation fund. Administered by a sub-office. Every answer created distance without denying the work. Sybil scanned the daily sheets. One phrase appeared beside the eastern housing shelf. Relocation stakes installed. Bring me one. A runner returned with a narrow iron stake pulled from above the village roofs. Its head had been painted white. Coralie said, "Evacuation marker." No. Sybil turned the stake. 2 slits had been cut below the head, angled toward the prevailing wind. This is a wind cut marker. The royal surveyor frowned. For measuring cross shear? For creating it. Placed above a housing shelf. The slits caught a narrow current and split it downward. One marker did little. A row trained the wind to strike the same roofline until the structure began to fail. Why install them? Everard asked. To make ordinary storm damage appear inevitable. Coralie's expression did not change. Or to test wind direction before evacuation. The same stakes are used in unoccupied passes, not with the cuts facing homes. Contractors may have placed them incorrectly, across an entire shelf. Negligence is not policy. The brace groaned again. One outer rivet tore free and vanished into the ravine. Count how many remain, Sybil ordered. The crew found 12. All faced the same direction. The private lanes were not built after the villages became dangerous. The villages had been made dangerous because private lanes needed room. Still, the records did not name who chose the placement. Sybil tied a guide rope around her waist and stepped onto the swaying span. Everard caught the loose end. What are you doing? Finding a permanent anchor before your palace ring folds. I am coming. You will slow the line. Tell me where to place my weight. She looked at the hand gripping the rope. Years ago, she had taught him to listen to tension. Now his order forced her to use that lesson against damage he had permitted. 2 steps behind, never beside me. If the braid snaps, cut yourself free. The words struck him. Her husband had done exactly that. Neither spoke his name. They crossed toward the old mountain brace, while ash struck their faces. Beneath them, the housing shelf vanished through gray wind. At the stone anchor, Sybil found the original ring buried under contractor plates. It had not failed. It had been deliberately covered and left outside the private lane system. Bring the cutting order. The clerk opened the High Ridge authorization. The order permitted removal, masking, or abandonment of communal anchors interfering with emergency corridor expansion, Coralie said. That language came from the Crown's first-year flight reforms. Everard looked at the seal. His own dragon mark pressed through the wax. He had approved emergency corridor expansion after the Glass Ridge disaster, when fear of losing royal riders made sheltered flight sound like survival. The order did not command sabotage. It gave the ministry authority to decide which public anchors stood in the way. The braid was temporary. So was royal courage, unless Everard made the choice permanent. Sybil looked from his seal to the buried ring. My husband did not die under obsolete construction. The palace brace screamed behind them. He died under a future someone had already purchased. Everard read the date aloud. The authorization had been issued during the first winter of his reign, before the relocation fund, before the private lane contracts, and before Sybil's husband fell. Coralie said quietly, "The ministry acted under powers you granted. The Stormnet had borrowed the palace. By dawn, the palace would either hold the villages or admit it had never meant to, and the order that made the eastern shelf removable carried the Dragon King's own emergency seal. The seal did not prove Everard had ordered the sabotage. It proved the ministry had never needed to ask him again." Coralie Sedge stood beside the buried communal ring, while ash hissed across the plates. Emergency corridor authority allowed the ministry to act quickly, she said. Without it, half the kingdom's dragon routes would have failed after Glass Ridge. And with it, Sybil replied, your contractors buried the anchors that kept people on the mountain. The order permitted removal of obstructive structures. It permitted judgment without the people carrying the risk. The palace brace groaned behind them. A temporary braid snapped a surface strand. The sound traveled through the line like a small bone breaking. Sybil drove her hook beneath the contractor plate. "We have minutes." Everard looked toward the village roofs. "What will hold permanently?" "The old mountain ring, if we uncover it and reconnect the eastern span," Coralie said. "That ring was removed from service for instability. It is still seated in living stone. Because it was too dangerous to extract. Because someone found it easier to hide than destroy." The contractor bolts had been fused with dragonfire. Everard knelt beside her. "Stand back." Black scales surfaced along his wrist. He pressed his palm to the bolt heads, softening the fused metal without melting the ring below. A gust hit the span. Everard's shoulder locked, and the old terror from Glass Ridge crossed his face. Sybil did not soften her voice. "Listen to the ring." He closed his eyes. Beneath the storm, the iron carried a low, steady note. He steadied his breathing to it. Together they lifted the plate. The original anchor ring emerged intact. Coralie stepped closer. Reactivating a condemned public anchor without review violates the safety laws Sybil claims to defend. Sybil threaded a test line through the ring. "A review signed after a death, and before recovery, is not safety. Your husband's suspicions were never confirmed, because the office that benefited from them being wrong controlled the confirmation." Everard stood. "What authority is required to restore the ring?" "Your emergency seal," Coralie said. "The same authority you now condemn." "Then I revoke it." Coralie's expression remained composed. "You may suspend one project. You cannot dissolve the corridor mandate during an active cyclone without council review." "I am not requesting review. The mandate funds medicine flights, military dispatch, and grain transport. It also allowed public anchors to be classified as obstacles. Because some were. This one was not. You know that after one inspection conducted by the widow responsible for the system." Sybil looked at Everard. "Do not defend me because you need someone else to be right. I am revoking the authority because I was wrong to grant judgment without public witness." It was not an apology. It was an admission with consequences. Everard pressed his dragon seal into a blank order tablet. "Emergency corridor expansion suspended. All private lane materials subject to StormNet requisition until village anchors are restored." Coralie read it. "You are dismantling the kingdom's safest air routes during the worst storm of the season. I am taking back materials purchased by making other routes unsafe." The order traveled by signal flame. Royal crews began stripping braces, flight hooks, and silver cable from private platforms. Cargo houses protested. 3 noble riders demanded exemption. Everard denied all 3. Sybil did not thank him. She handed him a hauling line. "Pull when I say." They worked beside the tower crews as the storm thickened. The silver sky spiders remained above the palace, adjusting their web whenever the load shifted. They did not help. They only showed where stress moved. The permanent braid had to pass through the mountain ring, cross the eastern void, and reconnect to Tower 6 without tearing the palace brace apart. Sybil called the sequence. "Release private support 2. The royal crew obeyed. "Transfer half-load to the mountain ring." Iron screamed. Everard wrapped the hauling line around his forearm. "No, not yet." A roof beam tore free below. "Now." He pulled. Dragon strength surged through the rope, but Sybil struck his wrist with her hook. "Too hard. You will rip the tower loose." He reduced the force. Again. This time he followed her count. The line settled into the old ring. The palace brace eased back 1 finger. Below, the roof stopped lifting. Not safe, but held. The villages had not been rescued by a king descending from the sky. They had been stabilized by public anchors, exhausted crews, and a widow who knew where the mountain refused to lie. A runner arrived with High Ridge Aeroworks personnel roll. "The foreman did not transfer west," he said. "No office received him," Coralie said. Then he abandoned his contract. The runner opened another page. His final pay was issued from the relocation fund on the night Master March died. Sybil's hands stopped. "For what work?" The clerk read the line. "Emergency severance assistance at occupied housing tower." Everard looked toward her. "What does that mean?" Sybil did not answer. The old anchor box held one more object beneath the contractor plate. A rusted safety clasp. cut clean through on one side and bent outward on the other. She knew it before she touched it. Her husband's harness clasp. The official report said his line had failed under obsolete construction, but the metal showed no failure. It had been opened under load, and someone had been paid that night for severance assistance at the tower where he fell. The clasp changed the question. Not who had broken his line, but what weight he had been trying to release. Sybil held the rusted metal beneath the storm lamp, while the palace brace groaned behind her. One side had been bent outward from within the locking mouth. The other carried a shallow crescent, where a thumb lever had been forced against full tension. Coralie Sedge looked at the mark. An emergency release. Storm workers use them when a line becomes dangerous. Not while hanging above a ravine. Your husband may have panicked. Sybil raised her eyes. He repaired towers for 18 years. Experience does not make a man incapable of fear. No. It teaches him which fear deserves obedience. Everard took the clasp from her. What would happen if he stayed attached? That depends on where his safety line was anchored. The official death record named the outer roof brace. Sybil climbed toward it before anyone could stop her. The permanent re-anchor held the eastern span, but the storm continued pressing against it. Every few breaths, silver strands around the palace shifted to show where the load moved next. Everard followed her across the upper frame. Coralie remained below with the ledgers. You should wait for a survey crew, Everard said. A survey crew already called this natural failure. The old housing tower leaned over the ravine, scarred but standing. Families had lived inside it on the night Sybil's husband fell. The court had treated them as background to an engineering loss. Sybil found the outer brace beneath layers of ash. The original safety ring had been replaced. A newer plate covered the old bolt pattern, but one deep groove remained in the stone. The groove angled down toward the communal net, rather than back toward the tower. Everard touched it. His line pulled outward. No. The whole span pulled outward. She threaded a guide cord through the remaining groove and drew it toward the lower anchor that High Ridge Arrowworks had cut. The geometry answered. When the lower communal tie was severed, the collapsing net transferred its recoil into the housing tower. Her husband's safety line had become the last rigid connection between the falling outer span and the occupied structure. His body had not merely been hanging from the tower. The storm had been using him as a lever against it. If he stayed clipped, Everard said, the falling net would have pulled through this brace and taken the upper housing wall with it. How many people were inside? More than 40. The tower shuddered beneath them. Everard looked down through the ash. He opened the clasp. Sybil pressed her thumb against the old release mark. He cut himself out of the load. The words hurt differently from the lie the court had given her. Her husband had not died because obsolete construction failed him. He had understood the tension before anyone else did. He had known that his falling weight, added to the net recoil, would tear the occupied tower from the mountain. So he had chosen the ravine. Coralie's voice rose from the lower platform. That reconstruction remains theoretical. Sybil descended with the clasp. The bend came from an internal release under full load. The stone groove shows the safety line pulling toward the severed anchor. The tower remained standing because the final weight left the system. It proves he released himself, Coralie said. It does not prove why the lower tie was cut. No. The contractor marks prove how it was cut. By a licensed crew operating under emergency authority. On an occupied tower. The relocation record listed the shelf as cleared. Sybil went still. It was never cleared. Then the village office failed to report remaining residents. Children were tied to those roofs during every storm. No inspector could mistake the tower for empty. Coralie folded her hands. Records moved through several offices. A mistaken occupancy report is not ministerial intent. Everard looked toward the High Ridge files. Bring the clearance sheet. A clerk found it beneath the contractor payment record. Eastern Housing Tower. Vacated. Resident count. 0. Work authorized before corridor expansion. The form bore no village witness mark. No tower keeper had signed it. Only a ministry sub-office stamp appeared beneath the false count. Sybil searched the old repair cabinet built into the tower wall. Inside lay rusted hooks, torn gloves, and a slate protected beneath oilcloth. Her husband's final duty slate. He had recorded every occupied level before climbing outside. Level 1, 12 residents. Level 2, 9. Level 3, 14. Upper rooms, 7, including 3 children. Total, 42. Across the bottom, he had carved one instruction so hard the slate had chipped. Housing occupied. Do not release lower tie. Everard read it twice. Coralie said, "The contractor crew may never have seen that slate. They were working on the same tower," Sybil replied. "The foreman received orders from the sub-office. Then find him. The ministry does not know where he went. You paid him on the night my husband died. For emergency severance assistance." What was severed? Coralie did not answer for the record she had not written. The palace brace gave another long groan across the ravine. Sybil felt the re-anchored line tighten. The villages were holding, but dawn remained hours away. Everard ordered the old tower converted into a storm command post, and every remaining relocation stake removed under witness. He also ordered the occupancy records preserved. He did not apologize. He stood beside the stone groove where Sybil's husband had chosen 42 lives over his own, and looked at the emergency seal that had made the contractor crew lawful. "I did not authorize an occupied tower to be listed as empty," he said. "You authorized a system that did not need to ask the people living there." The truth landed without ceremony. A runner arrived from the western roost carrying a sealed contractor pouch. High Ridge Aeroworks' missing foreman had left it before disappearing. Inside was the crew's private night sheet from the storm when Sybil's husband fell. The final entry read, "Lower communal tie severed despite tower engineer's refusal. Occupancy objection overridden under casualty indemnity." Below it was a second notation. Payment doubled if housing loss completed before private corridor inspection. The night sheet did not prove who doubled the payment. It proved someone had priced the tower's fall. Coralie Sedge read the contractor entry beneath the storm lamps. "A private crew sheet has no standing until its authorship is verified. Foreman alter notes to shift liability after accidents." Sybil kept the slate showing 42 residents beside it. The official record said 0, which may be a village reporting failure. The crew wrote that occupancy was disputed. They may have written it afterward. The pouch was sealed before the foreman disappeared. Coralie's gaze remained steady. Then he may have prepared an excuse before abandoning his post. The re-anchored storm net tightened across the ravine. Its new mountain ring held, but every gust drove pressure into the palace braces still carrying part of the temporary load. Silver sky spiders moved along the web overhead. They did not descend toward the records. They followed strain. One bright line shifted away from the ministerial platform and fastened to the old housing tower, marking the weight Sybil's crew had restored. Evidence could name a pattern. Only people could decide what the pattern meant. Everard turned to the contractor clerk. "What is casualty indemnity?" The clerk hesitated. "A protection clause for crews ordered to work in unstable zones." Protection for whom? For contractors, cargo houses, and corridor investors exposed to delay or structural loss. Sybil looked at the night sheet. Payment doubled if the housing loss was completed. Coralie replied. "Compensation rises when infrastructure collapses during active work. That is ordinary risk law. Ordinary law does not call a tower's destruction completed. Contract shorthand is often brutal. So is burying families beneath it." A third alarm bell sounded from the eastern shelf. Not collapse. Overload. Sybil moved to the command rail. "Tower 5 is pulling too high. Remove the remaining relocation stakes before the wind turns again." Crews descended across the roofs with hooked lines while Everard ordered the Treasury indemnity books opened. Coralie objected. "Financial review during an active cyclone will delay rescue." "The rescue continues," Sybil said. "The records travel more easily than children." She crossed the housing shelf, pulling each white-topped stake from the stone. The wind-cut slits all faced the same angle, training the storm toward the roofs. The relocation fund had already named removable. Everard followed with 2 guards. At the final marker, Sybil found a small stamped number beneath the ash paste. Not a contractor number. A Treasury bond code. The same code appeared beside the casualty indemnity clause. This was not merely a wind marker, she said. It was inventoried as part of the insured works. Coralie examined the stamp. Large projects often bond every installed component, even components placed outside the private corridor. If their failure affects the corridor, the stake was designed to make the village fail. That remains your interpretation. Sybil held it toward the roofline. Then stand below it when the wind turns. Everard took the stake from her. Opened the bond. The treasury book showed a consortium of private riders, ore carriers, and palace suppliers had financed the corridor expansion. Their returns increased if public StormNet maintenance was declared unsustainable. A second clause activated if the eastern housing shelf became permanently uninhabitable before the first royal inspection. The inspection was scheduled for dawn. Sybil looked toward the dark horizon. Less than 4 hours remained. Coralie said, "The clause protects investors if the villages fail naturally before construction is certified." "The ministry expected failure," Sybil said. "The ministry anticipated risk. It placed wind cut markers above occupied roofs. Contractors placed them, under an insured work order, through a sub-office. Every answer moved responsibility one table farther away." Everard read the payment schedule. If the shelf survived inspection, private corridor fees would be capped until public protections were restored. If the shelf failed, all eastern air rights transferred to the consortium for 20 years. "The investors profit only if the villages are lost before dawn," he said. "They recover costs if land becomes unusable. They receive the land. For stabilization. For ownership." Coralie's voice hardened. "A kingdom cannot maintain every settlement indefinitely. Mountain populations move. Trade routes must adapt. People are not weather," Sybil said. "No. They are often where weather becomes most expensive." There was no confession in the words, only a philosophy cold enough to permit the same result. The palace brace gave a sudden shriek. A rivet snapped. The temporary line lurched, pulling Sybil sideways. Everard caught the hauling rope, but she cut his hand away from her harness before he could fasten himself to it. "Anchor to stone. I can hold you. You can pull both of us off the roof." He obeyed. Together, they shifted the line through a lower ring until the strain eased. For one breath, they stood close beneath the silver web. Ash caught in Sybil's hair, and dragon heat, rising from Everard's skin. "You kept returning to my towers," she said. "You knew these nets worked. I knew I could breathe on them. That was not the same as trusting the people who built them." No, he did not ask her to soften the truth. The treasury clerk arrived with the final bond page. One payment remained pending. Completion bonus. Payable upon verified loss of the eastern housing shelf before dawn inspection. Receiving party: High Ridge Aero Works emergency crew. Everard ordered the payment frozen and every investor named publicly, Coralie said. "Freezing a lawful bond before proof of misconduct will trigger claims against the Crown. Then the Crown may answer them. That is not governance, it is panic." "No," Sybil said. "Panic is what families do when someone has sold the roof above them." A signal flare rose from the lower village. Red. Then another. The command runner reached them breathless. "Someone has cut the secondary re-anchor below Tower 5. Sybil looked toward the strained web. The spiders had already begun avoiding one new point. Not because they knew who had touched it. Because the tension there had just been taught to lie again. And dawn, the hour that would make the investors rich, if the housing shelf failed, was now less than 3 hours away. Tower 5 dropped half a span before the alarm finished sounding. The secondary braid snapped downward, dragging 2 roof bridges and chimney anchors toward the ravine. Families crawled across slate, while the palace support screamed under the transfer. Sybil was already moving. "Cut the upper walkways. Keep the housing walls separate from the falling span." A crewman hesitated. "There are people on them." "Then move the people first." Everard struck evacuation pattern 3 on the command bell. Guards ran toward the eastern stairs as another section of net tore free. Coralie Sedge remained beneath the ministry canopy. "This proves the communal system cannot be stabilized." "It proves someone cut a line installed less than an hour ago," Sybil said. She reached Tower 5's main wheel. The braid had been sliced at the lower re-anchor, beyond anyone standing on the roof. The maintenance ledge. Someone is still below us. The ledge hung beneath the shelf, reachable only by flight or descent through the failing net. Everard removed his cloak. "I will go. The crosswind is driving into the cliff. I can reach the anchor faster than a rope team." Black scales climbed his throat. The change rolled through him with the sound of stone opening. Wings spread above the roofs, vast and dark against the silver web. Then Sybil saw the left membrane. A pale tear ran from the inner joint almost to the outer rib, healed unevenly and tightened by old scar tissue. The wing could carry him in clear air. In an ash cyclone, it would fold under a hard-side gust. Everard? He looked at her through dragon gold eyes. You knew. I knew you feared the crossing. I did not know the wind had kept part of you. Another roof bridge dropped. There is no time. There is time to choose the path that does not add your body to the load. She fastened a guideline to the mountain ring and passed its end through a silver web junction. The spiders shifted away. They did not understand rescue. They simply refused the false angle and left the balanced line open. Fly inside the web's lee. Let the palace take the first crosswind. Coralie stepped forward. The royal dragon cannot be tethered to invasive creatures. He is tethered to stone. The web only shows him where pressure breaks. Everard launched. The first wing beat carried him beyond the roofline. The second drove him toward the maintenance ledge. Ash struck his scarred membrane, and the left wing buckled. Sybil felt the guideline yerk. Do not fight the drop. Turn with it. His body rolled toward the ravine. For one breath, the black dragon disappeared beneath the village shelf. Then the line tightened along Sybil's balanced angle. Everard folded the injured wing, used the good one to turn, and struck the maintenance ledge hard enough to crack its rail. He remained on the mountain. Lower me, Sybil ordered. Her crew anchored her descent rope to the old communal ring. She went over the edge with storm hooks at her belt. Below, Everard had trapped a man against the cliff. The missing High Ridge foreman held a double-toothed cutter. Fresh silver fibers clung to its jaws. He did not deny cutting the braid. I had a completion warrant. The shelf had to fail before inspection. Who issued it? Everard demanded. A bonded corridor office. Which office? The warrant carried no name. Coralie's voice came from above. Bearer warrants are issued throughout emergency works. A contractor's claim does not establish ministerial direction. Sybil examined the cut. Smooth paired scoring. Same spacing as the old anchor marks. The foreman looked at her. I was told the shelf was empty years ago. You stood beneath occupied roofs tonight. The payment clears my crew's debt. So you cut anyway. His silence was calculation finally made visible. A gust drove the falling span against the cliff. Stone cracked above them. Sybil pointed to the lower mountain socket. We can save Tower 5 if the palace landing chain reaches this ring. Everard looked upward. The chain secured the eastern royal flight gate. Removing it would make the private corridor unusable beyond this storm. Coralie understood first. That gate controls every royal approach from the east. Then royal approaches will change. Everard said. You are dismantling permanent infrastructure on the word of a contractor and a widow. I am dismantling the part that can keep people alive now. He ordered the landing chain released. The iron links descended through ash, tearing the eastern flight gate from its hinges. Sybil caught the end, passed it through the mountain socket, and locked it to the surviving village braid. Pull on my count. Everard shifted back before the damaged wing could fail again. His left arm trembled from the strain. 1. Tower crews took the line. 2. The palace winch engaged. 3. The chain lifted the falling span away from the housing wall. Roofs settled against the shelf. Families crossed into stone shelters while the old communal anchor accepted the load. The private corridor gate hung broken above them. This time, Everard had not merely paused the privilege. He had spent it. The foreman's warrant remained clenched in his hand. Under witness lamp, its treasury code matched the completion bonus in the casualty bond. A second mark appeared beneath the wax. Inspection authority reserved to the Sky Ministry's highest office. Coralie said, That seal certifies structural loss. It does not order one. Sybil looked from the cut braid to the villages that had nearly become profitable ruins. No. It only ensured the same office that prepared their removal would decide whether the removal was complete. Everard opened the inspection schedule. At dawn, one official alone had been assigned to certify the eastern shelf uninhabitable. Sky Minister Coralie Sedge. Dawn reached the eastern shelf before the storm released it. Sky Minister Coralie Sedge arrived beneath a black inspection canopy with 6 clerks, 2 royal surveyors, and the authority to decide whether the villages still existed as homes. The eastern flight gate hung broken, and emergency braids crossed palace braces and old communal anchors. But the houses still stood. Coralie opened the inspection book. Structural survival during one storm does not establish long-term habitability. The shelf has suffered repeated failures and unauthorized load transfers. Sybil stood beside Tower 5's restored wheel. The transfers came from private lanes built on severed public anchors. That remains under investigation. The contractor who cut last night's braid is in custody. He acted under a bearer warrant. Stamped for inspection by your office. Inspection authority confirms damage. It does not create it. Coralie had not confessed. She did not need to deny what procedure could bury. Everard stood without a ceremonial mantle, his left arm bound where the cyclone had strained his old wing injury. "What will you certify?" he asked. "That the eastern shelf cannot safely remain occupied." Before testing the restored anchors, the repairs were made during crisis conditions by the engineer disputing the ministry's findings. Sybil looked toward the families in stone shelters, then test them before witnesses. A live load test during an active cyclone would be reckless. Less reckless than declaring homes lost while investors wait for the land. Coralie's face did not change. Financial benefit does not invalidate structural danger. No. But it invalidates a private judgment by the office that profits from the result. Everard ordered the inspection open to villagers, tower crews, cargo houses, and the Winter Council. Coralie objected. "Public observers will interfere with technical procedure." "So did private money," he said. Sybil marked 6 anchor lines. 3 belonged to the communal net, 2 to private corridor supports, and 1 to the broken palace gate. Above them, the silver sky spiders remained stretched across the royal skyline. They did not gather around Sybil or threaten Coralie. Their geometry shifted only when weight changed. "We return the storm load in measured stages," Sybil said. "If the villages are lost, the communal anchors will shed tension unevenly. If private works cause the instability, the old mountain rings will balance when corridor load is removed." The first stage began. Royal winches released 10 degrees of pressure from the ministerial platform. The village anchors tightened. The spiders shifted one line from the palace to the old eastern ring. Balanced. At 20 degrees, 2 private supports twisted toward the ravine. The communal anchors remained steady. At 30, a contractor plate split and exposed another buried mountain ring. Coralie said, "Abandoned supports may have been left for legitimate reasons. Then the abandonment record should exist." None did. The storm struck from the north. Every rope screamed. A palace brace bent. Everard reached for the hauling line. Sybil stopped him. "Not strength. Sequence." He waited. Tower 6 took the first share. Tower 5 took the second. The buried eastern ring accepted the third. Everard pulled only when she signaled. The load settled. The silver sky spiders crossed the gap and spun one bright span between the restored communal rings. The web did not certify law. It showed balanced tension where the ministry had declared none could exist. The royal surveyors compared the readings. "The shelf is presently stable," one said. "The failures originate at altered load points beneath the private corridor works." Sybil looked toward the tower where her husband had cut himself free. He had not died beneath a system too old to work. He had died keeping alive a system someone needed, declared obsolete. Coralie turned to Everard. "The kingdom still requires protected flight. Remove the corridors, and you endanger medicine, grain, and defense. Then those systems will be rebuilt without making villages carry their cost. You cannot replace an aerial network during storm season." "No. But I can end contracts that reward public failure." The Winter Council demanded every record issued under the emergency corridor seal. Coralie remained composed. "The Crown authorized that seal." Everard faced the crowd. "I did." He did not hide behind the ministry. "I granted emergency power without village witness, public load review, or independent inspection. That authority made concealment lawful before anyone proved sabotage." Sybil watched him accept the part that belonged to him. It was not repair. But it was the first public truth he had not borrowed from her mouth. Everard suspended the private lane contracts and transferred storm protection to a temporary council of tower engineers, village representatives, dragon riders, and public quartermasters. Coralie said, "You are surrendering royal control during a cyclone." "I am ending private control disguised as royal necessity." The guards approached her. She did not confess. When the trade houses starve these villages next winter, she said, remember that I built a system capable of paying for their survival. You built one capable of paying only after their disappearance, Sybil replied. Coralie was placed under inquiry for fraudulent occupancy records, concealed contractor payments, conflicted inspection authority, and attempted certification of profitable loss. Sybil's husband's death remained a separate charge. The evidence showed his warnings were ignored, his tower falsely listed empty, and a paid crew severed the lower tie despite his refusal. It did not yet prove who intended his death. A tower bell rang from the southern ridge. The cyclone's final wall was turning directly toward the palace and villages. Sybil studied the load map. The restored anchors could hold the homes, but only if the palace released every remaining private corridor brace into the public storm net. Everard looked at the silver towers of his residence. How much of the palace will remain? Enough to remember what it was built on, Sybil said. Before the cyclone's final wall reached the mountain, Everard ordered the palace stripped to its bones. Royal crews opened the private corridor braces one by one. Silver gates fell from their hinges. Landing chains and reinforced support rings were dragged across the roofline towards Sybil's storm crews. Nobles shouted from the galleries, "The western wing will collapse. The dragon roosts will be exposed." Everard stood beneath the palace signal tower with his injured arm bound against his side. "Then move everyone into village shelters." A court officer stared at him. "The shelters built for people the crown listed as removable," Everard said. Sybil climbed the central brace while the silver sky spiders shifted above her. Their web had wrapped the palace because its structures carried stolen tension. Now the pattern loosened as royal weight returned to public anchors. The creatures did not choose the villages. They followed balance. "Release Corridor 4, Sybil called. The brace crew hesitated. Corridor 4 supported the royal dragon balcony and half the eastern residence. Everard took the release hammer himself. On her count, the cyclone wall darkened the horizon. Ash lightning moved through it without sound. "Not yet," Sybil said. The storm net tightened beneath her boots. "Now." Everard struck. The locking pin broke free. The royal balcony dropped before its chains caught. Stone railings shattered, but the released support swung outward and entered the communal load system. The village towers steadied. Another brace followed. Then another. Each choice removed something from the palace and returned something to the mountain. The final wall struck. Wind hit the eastern shelf like a moving cliff. The restored storm net bowed until its center nearly touched the rooftops. Sybil's crew locked their knees against the rails. Everard seized the hauling line beside her. "Sequence," she shouted. He waited. Tower 5 took the first pull. The mountain ring took the second. The palace landing chain took the third. Now, Everard pulled not with all his strength, but with the amount she gave him. The web blazed silver. Spiders raced along balanced lines and abandoned every brace that twisted falsely under load. Their movement gave Sybil seconds of warning. Not rescue. "Cut the treasury span." A royal engineer recoiled. "That span holds the crown vault. It is pulling the housing shelf sideways." Everard raised the hammer. Could it? The treasury span fell into the ravine. The palace roof opened to ash. The villages remained on the mountain. For nearly an hour, the kingdom existed as tension shared between stone, rope, dragon iron, and human hands. No district held alone. When the cyclone turned south, families emerged from shelters. The palace had lost 2 balconies, the eastern flight gate, and every private corridor brace. Not one village tower had fallen. Sybil remained at the central wheel until the last line stopped shaking. Everard stood beside her, ash in his hair and blood darkening his bandage. "You should have that arm seen," she said. "So should you. My arm is not carrying a kingdom." "No," she said. "Your decisions are." He accepted the correction. By noon, the Winter Council convened in Stormnet Tower 7, rather than the damaged palace. The High Ridge foreman testified under guard. His records connected contractor payments, false occupancy reports, relocation stakes, and private corridor expansion. He could not identify who first designed the scheme. Coralie did not confess. She argued that every decision had passed through lawful offices and that centralized corridors protected trade, medicine, and defense. The council found intention irrelevant where profit depended upon public failure. Her authority was suspended pending trial for fraudulent certification, unlawful displacement planning, concealment of safety reports, and misuse of emergency powers. The charge concerning Sybil's husband remained under separate inquiry. His death record was corrected first. It no longer called his fall a consequence of obsolete construction. It stated that he released his own safety clasp to prevent a collapsing net from pulling an occupied housing tower into the ravine. 42 names were entered beneath his. Not as casualties, as the lives his choice preserved. Sybil read the correction without performing grief for the court that had once used it against her. Everard abolished the private lane contracts and surrendered corridor authority to a public storm council of tower engineers, village delegates, dragon riders, medical carriers, and independent surveyors. Storm protection became a public right. No shelter route could begin with payment. No communal anchor could be removed without village witness. No failure could be certified by an office holding financial interest in the land beneath it. The palace paid to restore every storm net and housing tower. Sybil refused a royal appointment. I will not maintain public safety at the pleasure of the crown. Everard signed the charter without argument. Then the crown will answer to the council. Weeks later, Sybil crossed the new eastern span during its final inspection. Everard followed 2 steps behind, his repaired flight brace hidden beneath a plain black coat. At the narrowest point, a crewman lifted a safety line between them. Sybil shook her head. Anchor him to the tower. Everard did not object. You still do not trust me tied to you. I trust you to carry your own weight. And if I learn? Then one day I may choose to share mine. The answer was not forgiveness. It was possibility. They crossed beneath the silver webs, while village storm lamps burned below. Behind them, the palace remained broken along its eastern face. Everard had ordered the damage left visible until every public net was restored. At the final tower, he placed his hand on the guide rope and listened before stepping forward. This time, he did not look down.